The child everyone overlooked was the only person who never lied. That realization came to me far too late, after decades of believing that the loudest voices in a family were also the most trustworthy. My name is Harrison Cole. I am 70 years old, and I have spent most of my life protecting a family legacy that I no longer recognize. The dining room of our old estate had witnessed birthdays, anniversaries, business celebrations, and quiet betrayals that nobody dared acknowledge aloud. The long oak table stretched beneath a crystal chandelier, polished until every reflection looked more perfect than the people sitting around it. Isabel poured wine with effortless grace beside David, who stared into his glass as though the answer to every question might be waiting there. Eleanor remained unusually quiet beneath the chandelier, folding her hands together every few moments before looking away whenever our eyes met. Ethan stood near the staircase instead of taking his seat, watching the room with the patient curiosity that only someone still searching for the truth could possess. James entered carrying another tray, moving through the room with the steady confidence of a man who had witnessed more family history than any photograph hanging on these walls. Thomas had already arrived with a leather briefcase resting beside his chair, while Sophia quietly observed everyone without interrupting the fragile piece. Even Victoria appeared unusually restrained, and Lily smiled politely, although her nervous glance toward the hallway suggested she expected something to happen before the evening ended. Resting beside my plate was a faded envelope that had remained unopened for almost 20 years. It had been sealed by a family attorney with one simple instruction written across the front in careful handwriting: open only when every living heir is present. For years, I believed the envelope contained nothing more than forgotten legal paperwork. I was wrong. 3 weeks earlier, while organizing old records inside the library, James had discovered another document hidden beneath a loose drawer. It mentioned a child whose existence had quietly disappeared from every official conversation inside this family. There were no dramatic accusations, no sensational claims, only dates, signatures, and one sentence that refused to leave my thoughts. Someone had intentionally rewritten the story of our family. Tonight, for the first time, everyone who had benefited from that silence sat together beneath the same roof, completely unaware that the past had finally found its way back to the table. The room remained comfortably elegant, yet something invisible had shifted beneath the polished surface. Nobody noticed it except those who had spent years learning to recognize silence before it became a confession. I kept my hand resting on the unopened envelope while James quietly collected empty glasses from the far end of the table. He paused beside my chair for only a moment before saying, almost too softly for anyone else to hear, "The library is exactly as you left it, sir." That simple sentence carried more meaning than anyone in the room could have imagined. Ethan looked toward me with quiet curiosity, sensing that something important had just passed between us. Across the table, Isabel continued speaking about an upcoming charity gala, carefully guiding the conversation toward familiar subjects. David nodded politely, but his attention wandered every few seconds toward the envelope beside my plate. Eleanor had barely touched her dinner. She traced the edge of her napkin with trembling fingers, her eyes fixed on the old grandfather clock standing against the dining room wall. I had known Eleanor for nearly 50 years, long enough to recognize the difference between ordinary worry and the burden of protecting a secret. Thomas remained patient, his leather briefcase still closed beside his chair. He never interrupted family conversations, but he also never attended gatherings without a purpose. Sophia quietly observed every exchange, saying almost nothing while absorbing details that everyone else ignored. Victoria maintained the composed expression that had defined her for decades, while Lily offered polite smiles that faded whenever someone mentioned family history. The chandelier above us reflected warm light across portraits of previous generations. Every painted face seemed to watch the evening unfold, reminding me that families often inherit unanswered questions along with treasured possessions. My thoughts drifted back to the forgotten document James had discovered beneath the loose drawer in the library. It contained no dramatic accusations, only official records referring to a child whose name had quietly vanished from every conversation after a single summer many years ago. No explanation followed, only signatures, dates, and careful amendments that appeared perfectly legal while leaving deeper questions unanswered. I finally looked toward Ethan and noticed the same thoughtful expression I remembered wearing at his age. He had always asked questions that others preferred to avoid. Before anyone could change the subject again, he spoke calmly. "Grandfather, have we ever lost someone from this family without talking about why?" The question settled over the table with surprising weight. Nobody answered immediately. Instead, every pair of eyes slowly found its way back to the unopened envelope resting beside my hand, as though everyone had suddenly realized it had been waiting for this exact moment all along. No one answered Ethan's question immediately. The silence that followed felt older than the house itself, settling over the dining room like another piece of inherited furniture that nobody remembered bringing inside. I watched each face around the table, searching for the smallest reaction. Isabel lowered her wine glass without taking another sip. David looked toward Eleanor, hoping she might offer the reassurance he could not find within himself. Eleanor remained motionless beneath the chandelier, her eyes fixed on the polished surface of the oak table as though she could still see memories reflected there. Thomas slowly rested one hand on his briefcase, but made no effort to open it. James quietly stepped away from the room, moving toward the library with the calm confidence of someone who already knew where the evening was leading. I excused myself from the table and followed him down the long hallway lined with portraits of generations who had carefully preserved the appearance of unity. The library door stood slightly open. James was waiting beside the antique desk where he had discovered the forgotten document weeks earlier. Without saying a word, he pulled open the loose drawer once again and reached farther into the hidden compartment. This time he removed a small wooden box wrapped in faded linen. The brass latch had darkened with age, yet the box had been carefully protected from dust and moisture. He placed it in front of me before quietly saying, "I never opened it, sir. I believed it belonged to you." I lifted the lid slowly. Inside rested several photographs, a folded birth record, and a child's silver bracelet engraved with a single date that matched the forgotten document. None of the photographs had ever appeared in our family albums. One picture showed Eleanor standing beside a young child, whose face carried unmistakable similarities to more than one person still sitting at the dinner table. Another showed the same child holding my late brother's hand beside the lake house during a summer afternoon. I thought I remembered completely. My heartbeat remained steady, but my certainty did not. Memory has a way of protecting us from details we are not ready to understand. As I carefully returned the photographs to the box, I noticed a sealed handwritten letter resting beneath them. Across the front, in elegant script I immediately recognized, were 6 words that changed everything before I had even broken the seal. It read, "For Harrison, when the truth becomes necessary." I held the letter for a long moment before looking toward the library doorway, where Ethan had quietly arrived without either of us hearing his footsteps. He did not ask what I had found. Instead, he simply looked at the old wooden box and whispered, "I think our family has been protecting the wrong secret all along." The letter remained unopened in my hands as Ethan and I walked back toward the dining room together. Neither of us spoke. Some discoveries deserve a few extra moments of silence before they become impossible to take back. When we entered the room, every conversation stopped. Isabel noticed the old wooden box immediately. Her composed smile remained in place, but I saw a brief flicker of uncertainty pass across her face before it disappeared. David stood as if he wanted to ask a dozen questions, yet could not decide which one mattered most. Eleanor closed her eyes for a heartbeat when she saw the faded envelope resting on top of the photographs. It was not the reaction of someone surprised by the past. It was the expression of someone who had spent years expecting it to return. Thomas quietly moved his briefcase onto the table, but still waited for my permission before opening it. Sophia remained attentive, carefully observing each person instead of the documents themselves. James resumed his place near the doorway, his calm posture unchanged, while Victoria and Lily exchanged a brief glance that ended almost as quickly as it began. I placed the wooden box beside the unopened envelope that had waited through dinner. The 2 objects looked ordinary against the polished oak table, yet together they carried more weight than any inheritance this family had ever discussed. Before I read this letter, I said calmly, "I want everyone to understand something. Whatever happened years ago cannot be changed tonight. What we choose to do after learning the truth still belongs to us. Nobody objected. Even Isabel remained silent. I carefully broke the seal and unfolded the letter. The handwriting belonged to my late brother, unmistakable despite the passing years. He wrote that if I was reading those pages, it meant the family had finally reached the point where protecting appearances had become more dangerous than revealing the truth. He explained that one child's identity had been intentionally concealed, not to steal an inheritance, but because several adults believed secrecy would spare an innocent life from endless conflict. As I continued reading, I realized the letter accused no one. Instead, it described a chain of fearful decisions that grew heavier with every passing year. Eleanor quietly lowered her head. David looked toward her with confusion instead of anger, searching for answers that only she could provide. Ethan stepped closer to the table, studying the photographs once more. One image caught his attention. He pointed to the child standing beside the lake, then looked directly at me. "Grandfather," he asked softly, "if everyone believed this child disappeared from the family, why is that same bracelet still being worn by someone who is sitting in this house tonight?" Every eye immediately turned toward the people gathered around the table, and for the first time that evening, the greatest mystery was no longer hidden inside a document, but somewhere among us. The room remained perfectly still after Ethan's question. Nobody glanced toward the bracelet immediately. Instead, every person seemed to search their own memories before daring to look around the table. I noticed Eleanor quietly raising one hand toward the silver bracelet resting beneath the cuff of her pastel cardigan. She touched it for only a second before letting her hand fall back into her lap. "I never wanted anyone to notice it," she whispered. Her voice carried neither fear nor defiance, only exhaustion. David stared at her in disbelief. "Mother, you have worn that bracelet for years." Eleanor nodded slowly. "Because it was the only promise I believed I could still keep." Isabel remained composed, but the confidence that usually surrounded her had begun to fade. She folded her hands together and watched Eleanor instead of me, as though she suddenly understood that the conversation had moved beyond anyone's ability to control. Thomas quietly opened his briefcase and removed a weathered folder tied with a faded ribbon. "There is one more document," he said. "Your brother instructed me never to release it unless Harrison discovered the earlier records himself." I accepted the folder without opening it. Too many answers arriving at once rarely produce understanding. Across the room, James stepped toward the fireplace and carefully adjusted an old framed photograph resting on the mantel. From where I stood, I could finally see the picture clearly. It showed our entire family gathered outside the lake house nearly 25 years earlier. Everyone I expected was there. Then I noticed a small child standing near the edge of the group, partially hidden behind my late brother. The child's face had been obscured by the shadow of a wide-brimmed hat, making identification impossible. Yet the silver bracelet around one wrist reflected the afternoon sunlight with unmistakable clarity. Ethan quietly approached the photograph. "This picture was always here," he said. "I never noticed the child." "Most people never did," James replied gently. "They only looked at the people they already expected to see." His words settled deeply inside me. Families often overlook what does not fit the story they have already accepted. I finally untied the ribbon around Thomas's folder and unfolded the first page. It was not a will. It was a sworn statement signed decades earlier, explaining that one child's legal identity had been changed to protect an inheritance dispute from destroying two branches of the family forever. The statement never revealed the child's current name. Instead, it ended with one handwritten sentence from my brother. "When the time comes, do not ask who inherited the fortune. Ask who inherited the truth." I slowly lifted my eyes from the page and looked around the dining room once more. For the first time that evening, I realized that the forgotten child had never truly disappeared from our family. We had simply spent years looking everywhere except the place where the truth had quietly remained in plain sight. The statement remained open in front of me while the room struggled to absorb what it implied. Nobody reached for the papers. Nobody challenged the signatures. Instead, each person seemed to measure years of family history against a truth that had quietly existed beyond every holiday photograph and every carefully rehearsed story. I looked toward Eleanor. She met my eyes for the first time that evening without turning away. "I thought protecting one child meant protecting everyone," she said softly. I understand now that silence only asked the next generation to carry questions they never deserved. David lowered himself back into his chair, rubbing one hand across his forehead as though trying to organize memories that no longer fit together. "Did father know?" he asked. Eleanor nodded once. "Your uncle knew. Your father knew enough to understand why the records were changed, but not enough to undo what had already been done." Thomas carefully closed the folder after I finished reading the statement. "The legal changes were valid under the law at that time," he explained. "The question has never been legality. The question has always been identity." Ethan remained standing beside the old photograph on the mantel. He studied the child's hidden face again before turning toward James. "You have known about this longer than anyone else here, have you not?" James answered with the quiet honesty that had always defined him. "I knew fragments. I never knew the entire story. My responsibility was to preserve what was entrusted to me until the family became willing to face it." Sophia finally spoke after listening in silence for most of the evening. "Every document points toward the same conclusion," she said calmly. "Someone believed that changing a name would solve a conflict. Instead, it created decades of uncertainty." Her observation settled over the room with remarkable clarity. Isabel remained composed, although she no longer attempted to guide the conversation. Even Victoria seemed unusually thoughtful, her attention fixed on the documents rather than the people around her. I gathered the photographs, the bracelet, the letter, and the sworn statement into a single stack. Viewed separately, each item raised questions. Together, they described a family that had slowly confused secrecy with protection. As I reached for the old envelope that had remained unopened since the beginning of the evening, I noticed one final detail written in small handwriting beneath the attorney's seal. I could not believe I had overlooked it before. It read, "Open only after the family remembers the forgotten child." I looked around the dining room and realized that we had finally reached that moment. Whatever rested inside the envelope was no longer meant to reveal a stranger. It was meant to reveal which person sitting beneath this roof had quietly carried the family's true legacy all along. The envelope felt unexpectedly light in my hands, as though the years had carried more weight than the paper. Inside it, I carefully unfolded the final document while everyone around the table remained silent. It was neither a revised will nor another legal statement. Instead, it was a handwritten declaration signed by my late brother and witnessed by Thomas decades earlier. He explained that the family fortune had never been the greatest concern. The greater responsibility had always been preserving the identity of a child who had become the center of an impossible decision made by frightened adults. The letter described how every legal change had been intended as a temporary solution until the family found the courage to tell the truth. That day never came. Temporary decisions quietly became permanent traditions. I lowered the paper and looked around the room. No one appeared angry anymore. They appeared tired. David spoke first. "So the inheritance was never truly about property." I nodded. "No, property only distracted everyone from the question that mattered." Ethan stepped closer, his attention fixed on the documents. "The forgotten child was never erased," he said thoughtfully. "The identity was." Thomas slowly removed one final sealed certificate from his briefcase. "Your brother instructed me to safeguard this until every previous document had been understood in the proper order." He placed it gently beside the photographs. Sophia examined the seal without opening it. "Whatever is inside should complete the timeline," she observed. Eleanor drew a slow breath before speaking. "If we open that certificate now, nobody should use it to blame another person. Every decision was made by people who believed they were protecting someone they loved." Her words carried the quiet honesty that had been missing from this family for years. Even Isabel lowered her eyes in respectful silence. Victoria no longer appeared interested in defending old assumptions. James remained near the doorway, watching the family rather than the paperwork, as though he understood that reconciliation always begins with people instead of documents. I carefully broke the seal and unfolded the certificate. It confirmed the original birth registration of the child whose legal identity had later been changed. More importantly, it established the rightful place that child had always occupied within our family line. The revelation did not identify an outsider arriving to claim a fortune. It revealed that the person everyone believed had the smallest connection to the family had quietly belonged at its very heart from the beginning. Ethan looked toward the portraits lining the walls and smiled faintly. "We spent years searching outside the family for answers," he said. "The truth never left this house." As I placed the certificate beside the letter, the photographs, and the bracelet, I realized that our greatest inheritance had never been hidden in a vault or written into an estate. It had been waiting patiently inside forgotten memories, asking only for the courage to finally be acknowledged. Morning light slowly replaced the shadows that had filled the dining room throughout the evening, yet no one seemed eager to leave the table. The documents remained spread across the polished oak surface like pieces of a puzzle that had finally revealed its true picture. I gathered the letter, the photographs, the birth certificate, and the sworn statement into a single stack before looking at each member of the family in turn. The silence no longer felt fearful. It felt reflective. David broke it first. "If the truth has finally been uncovered," he asked quietly, "what happens now?" I considered the question for a long moment. "Now we stop pretending that history only belongs to the people who wrote it," I answered. "It also belongs to those who quietly lived through it." Eleanor nodded slowly, relief softening the tension that had rested on her face for years. She reached into her cardigan pocket and carefully removed a small brass key attached to a faded ribbon. "There is one place I never allowed anyone to enter," she admitted. "I believe locking the door would also lock away the memories." James immediately recognized the key. "The East Wing Archive," he said softly. "It has remained untouched since your brother passed away." Thomas closed his briefcase without adding another document. For the first time that evening, it seemed no additional paperwork was necessary. Sophia suggested that everyone walk together rather than allowing a single person to search alone. Nobody objected. We crossed the quiet hallway lined with family portraits until Eleanor unlocked a heavy oak door hidden behind an old bookshelf. Inside was a small archive filled with neatly labeled boxes, handwritten journals, framed photographs, children's drawings, and carefully preserved keepsakes that had never appeared anywhere else in the house. Dust floated through the narrow beam of sunlight entering from a high window, giving the room the feeling of time itself standing still. Ethan gently lifted one photograph from a shelf and smiled. It showed the forgotten child laughing beside the lake, surrounded by people who clearly loved them, even if later generations had forgotten why those moments mattered. Isabel quietly studied the shelves without speaking. Victoria remained thoughtful. Lily slowly traced the spine of an old family album before placing it back exactly where she found it. I realized then that the greatest loss had never been money, property, or legal status. It had been memory. Families rarely fall apart because they remember too much. They fall apart because they decide certain memories are too inconvenient to keep. Standing together inside that forgotten room, we finally understood that the future of our family would not depend on choosing a new heir. It would depend on whether we had the courage to preserve the complete story for every generation that followed. As the archive door closed behind us, I realized the house itself seemed quieter than it had in years. Perhaps the walls no longer needed to carry the burden of secrets that belonged to living people instead of old timber and stone. We carried several boxes back into the library, placing them across the long wooden table beneath the tall windows. Dust had settled on every lid, yet each label had been written with remarkable care. Birth records, correspondence, family photographs, estate journals. James carefully opened the first box while Thomas arranged the documents in chronological order. Sophia suggested that every page remain exactly where it belonged so that no memory would be separated from the events surrounding it. It was the first time I had ever seen our family's history treated as something to understand instead of something to control. David quietly studied a collection of letters exchanged between my late brother and Eleanor. None of them contained accusations. They contained concern, uncertainty, and repeated promises that the truth would eventually be shared with the next generation. That promise had simply arrived decades later than anyone intended. Ethan discovered an old guest book from the lake house. One name appeared every summer for several consecutive years before disappearing without explanation. It matched the original birth certificate we had uncovered earlier that evening. "They never erased the child," Ethan said thoughtfully. "They only stopped saying the name aloud." His observation filled the room with a different kind of silence, one shaped by understanding rather than confusion. Eleanor nodded slowly. Names can disappear from conversations, she whispered, but they rarely disappear from the hearts of those who remember. Isabel stood near one of the tall windows, watching the first rays of morning spread across the estate gardens. For the first time since dinner began, she spoke without attempting to influence anyone else. "We spent years protecting the reputation of this family," she admitted. "Perhaps we should have protected the people instead." Even Victoria accepted those words with a quiet nod. James carefully placed the silver bracelet inside a small velvet box beside the photographs, treating it not as evidence, but as part of a family's restored history. I looked around the library and understood that no court, no attorney, and no inheritance could ever restore the years that had been lost. Yet something equally valuable remained within reach. We could still decide what story future generations would inherit. Not a story polished until every imperfection disappeared, but one honest enough to remind them that families are strengthened not by flawless histories, but by the courage to acknowledge every chapter with compassion, dignity, and truth. At that moment, the forgotten child was no longer defined by what had once been hidden. That child had finally become part of the family's memory again, exactly where they had always belonged.